Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Sour and SaaS. Very excited today to be joined by Drew Beechler. Welcome to the show, Drew.
Thanks so much for having me, Garrett. This is going to be a blast.
Yeah, man. Director of Marketing at High Alpha. How's that going over there?
It's incredible. I've been here at High Alpha almost 6 years, pretty much since the beginning. So I've had a chance to see a lot of different companies and get to work with a ton of founders over the years, and it's been an absolute blast.
I love that. What do you think? So you got to see a lot of different founders. What do you think when it comes to marketing? Like, what % of founders these days are getting better and better at marketing compared to the past? Where I think being a technical founder was kind of the expectation. Are more and more founders marketing centric, or kind of what's that makeup looking like in your mind these days?
Yeah, that's a great question. We at High Alpha, our business is unique in that not only are we a venture capital firm where we invest in B2B software businesses, but also incubate and kind of start companies out of the studio itself. And so over the past, years, we've started something like 30 companies. And so, the kind of founder profile really spans a pretty wide spectrum of those companies that I get to work with, from, highly technical founders, sometimes founders that are a bit more just deep in subject matter expertise. If we're kind of targeting something in the ed tech space, and one of our CEOs was a former president of a university, and so I think it's we're definitely seeing, when I think about some of the last 6, 7, 8 companies we started, there's definitely more of a lean toward marketing leaders turning into CEOs for sure. And at least kind of just having a good understanding of like the importance of marketing in the business. But I think for any founder, you always got to kind of think about what are my strengths in general, and then how do I round out the team around me with kind of building up some of that expertise. And I think that marketing coming to the table, whether it's in the founder's background or finding a co-founder on the marketing side or an early hire on the marketing side, I'm definitely seeing more and more companies lean into that earlier on than I'd say we've seen in the past, whether it is the founder themselves or, within the first 2, 3, 4 hires, they're adding that expertise into the team really early on. And I think I think so far we're seeing it pay out big dividends and really helping the company kind of grow bigger, faster, and build kind of a more meaningful brand kind of in the early days. It really, really helps them out.
No, and I mean, there's also like the brand on Twitter, and then there's the brand in your customers' eyes, which I always find is very ironic about the VC and like marketing founder world, right? Like you have these really like popular founders, but they have no market share. Like think Basecamp, like no one actually cares about their product, but they're somehow relevant on Twitter. So not that anyone ever actually says that, but it's kind of true, right? So when you think about this go-to-market reality in your organizations, what does the capital allocation mix look like in your mind? Like what % of the most successful SaaS companies, like the most successful SaaS companies coming out of High Alpha, what % of revenue are they spending on sales and marketing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the answer, it depends, is never a good answer, but it really does depend. It does depend around what industry they're in, how established the market is as well. Are we selling something that like already exists and we're just trying to kind of capture market share? Are we trying to convince the market that this should exist? And it's a lot of educational side of things. I think a lot of that kind of depends, but I think, in the early days, you should think about like probably whatever you're spending, it's too little, I would say, and think about someone once recently kind of was talking about a like 3x kind of CAC and what you should be willing to kind of spend, and kind of thinking about like your LTV of a company. And in the early days, you're probably spending way too little on those companies on the acquisition cost. And mainly it's just because the value of getting in those customers early on is just incredible, because you need the best learning. We always say the best learning always happens with customers. And so you need customers in the business in order to be able to learn, or even making a product people want, and how do we make the right product and the best product. And so it can't be overstated, that importance of just getting early customers in the door. And I think for the most part, a lot of companies are probably underinvesting in that area, to be honest. We also tend to be a firm that's pretty sales and marketing heavy organization as a whole anyway.
Yeah.
We have a lot of marketing and sales and go-to-market full-time headcount on the high alpha team. And that is definitely where like our expertise lies. So take that with a grain of salt, I guess, as well.
Yeah, no, and I get that. I think, I hear it's numbers like 30%, 40% of budget. Would you say that's a high number, 30% or 40%? I think that's probably accurate.
No, I think that's probably accurate. That's the thing about like headcount wise too, like around 10 to 20% of like your headcount being in marketing, even as well. So by the time, and usually within the first 5 employees is where I try to kind of encourage companies to make that full-time hire, and then kind of keep that 10 to 15% of like your organization in the marketing org through Series A, Series B, kind of if you're going the venture backed route.
Yeah. So explain this to me. VC invests in companies, oftentimes pre-revenue with no initial goal of EBITDA, which I'm totally okay with. Like I'm not one of those like, we need profit. I think the people who think they need profit are sometimes funny because in the pursuit of profit, you can rarely have a vision for more profit because it's based on cutting costs, not value creation, right? But we go to marketing, right? So let's put this into marketing. So you're a VC firm and you get a startup, you invest in them and you give them all this money and you want big market share. You want to get to $1 billion valuation, right? Like that's kind of the game we're playing. Why is their media mix so darn backwards? And here's what I mean by that. Why is everything about customer acquisition not market share, despite them saying in their vision they want market share, yet their whole entire business model is 90% direct response, 10% brand building, yet so they're like, their actual capital funding of their vision is completely disconnected from said vision, and no one in the world is calling any VC firm on it or SaaS startup on it. And it makes no sense. I spend over $1 million of my own money a year on research and development. I can guarantee you brand building is more impactful than direct response for market share. And so around those lines, why is that not translating?
Oh yeah, you're preaching to the choir here. I couldn't agree more. I think to your point, brand is so important. I think that they go hand in hand too, brand and demand. And the tough part that I think we try to just educate and help our portfolio companies or, just founders and CEOs understand is that the reality is that sometimes a brand is not measurable, and you got to kind of take the chances on the things that are unmeasurable, because those are the things in the long term that actually pay off. They're the things that pay compounding dividends where, Google,
but let's be honest
Facebook,
though for 1 second here, Drew, like what percent of so you got a client in your portfolio, what percent actually spend 50% of their budget on brand?
I would
even more than
say
10%. Like, do we have anybody who spends more than 10%? Like, cause I've got over 100 of these accounts and a lot of them like are in your portfolio. Like I've seen them, you know what I mean? So I'm like, what's the gap? Cause I get what you're saying, but why does it not translate? Like I never see it. Like I'm talking publicly traded across the board. Like I'm talking, they give me $1 million and they give me like 25K for brand.
Oh yeah. I think the way maybe you're thinking about how people are spending on brand might be different too. Like I would say like the spend is a lot more on brand on headcount and kind of like the experiential side of things, and that's where like I try to lean in a lot more too, is that like the quicker you can hire, like I'm a huge fan of, if you look at our team, we have 7 full-time designers at a venture capital firm with an employee base of 40 people, and we are definitely like a design-led organization. And I look at a lot of, SaaS companies and they might have a product or UI designer, but there's not a brand designer in sight, or, they outsource a lot of it. And that's like one thing, just like a small kind of very tactical thing, but looking at companies and saying, how do you think about design with a capital D and kind of intentionality? And it's things like that that kind of then trickle down into like,
I guess what I'm saying is brand awareness. So I get what you're saying. You're saying branding and positioning, customer experience, things like that. What I'm saying is brand awareness. So let me give you a perfect example, because I really do want to see what you think of this, because it's really going on. So like I did everything for SentinelOne for like 4 years pre-IPO. 3-4 years. I can't. It was like forever. I'm talking like we went through more different point of contacts at Sentinel One than I thought is imaginable, right? And we get the whole time though they want to beat CrowdStrike. Okay, you ever fly into SF?
Yes. Yep.
Do you ever see CrowdStrike all over the airport, everywhere you look? And
it's been a while since I've been to SFO, but yes, the like brand awareness and billboards along the 101 in SFO. Oh yeah, you can tell who is thinking about it and spending money on it for sure.
Now the hard part is though, right? Is that so then you go to these organizations, they say they want to beat CrowdStrike, and then you pitch a big connected TV campaign, you pitch a big brand campaign, you pitch that stuff, and then the immediate question is, well, how many customers are we going to get? And we both know you're not going to get a bunch of customers from a CTV directly. You're going to get them indirectly. They're going to come through direct. They're going to end up on your pipeline, but it's going to be over an extended period of time, and it's not going to be evaluated on an LTV CAC ratio like your Google Ads, your G2, your Capterra, your Software Advice, and the rest of your campaigns. So is there anything you can think of as a VC firm from your perspective and as a marketer that we could communicate as directive, or that your portfolio companies could, so that we get to where we're 50% direct response and 50% brand awareness? Because I would love to see that advertising mix, but I would say I literally can never ever get that approved.
Yeah, that's this is good. I'm kind of tracking what you're saying more now. I think you're right. It is incredibly difficult. I think a lot of times it stems a lot from, I would say, like the CEO too. You know what I mean? So like there's my guess is most of the time when you're kind of pitching to the CMO or the marketing head, they're like, hell yeah, I want to do a lot more of this. This is the fun stuff. This is why I got into marketing. And I think it's a lot of like, how do they better manage up and kind of educate up to the CEO, who usually, to your point, is not a marketer. They might be more technical, and a lot of like the only things that they kind of think about oftentimes are the ROI and kind of the dollar signs, and like, hey, show me more of this. And I think I had the pleasure. When I started my career, I worked at ExactTarget and got to work for our CMO Tim Kopp, who is now the CEO over at Terminus. And something that he kind of always said and that I loved was just like for a lot of marketers, I think their default is often to kind of focus on the demand gen side, which I think is not wrong as well. When you hit the numbers on the demand gen side, then it gives you the freedom to do all of like the fun stuff on the other side, like the brand building campaigns and the employer brand campaigns and on that sort of things. And I think, his biggest thing over the years has always been, how am I kind of educating up to my CEO, who's now at ExactTarget is now the high alpha managing partner, Scott, who is not, a traditionally trained marketer, but has a very keen kind of marketing mind. But, he was always about, how do I kind of educate up to Scott, like, what's important and why it's important. And you look even now too at like how the Terminus organization and kind of marketing function runs, and the freedom and the trust that he has in like the marketing organization to run big brand billboard campaigns and, out of home stuff and things that they're never going to pay back, ROI on a LTV to CAC, like tracking perspective. But I think it's some of that kind of, how do you educating up into your CEO and kind of getting them on board. I think there's no magic bullet, but I think personally, I just look for, if I were to take a new role at, a high growth SaaS company, that'd be the first thing I'd be looking for is, what importance where does marketing report up to? Do they report up to the CEO or to like someone else, a chief sales officer? Or, I think that says a lot about the company and the importance they place on marketing, and kind of how does the marketing function interact with, and what kind of trust and importance does the CEO kind of place on it? And I think more organizations moving to that point. I don't think there's a silver bullet, but that is, I think, a good challenge. And I think a lot of companies should be thinking more that way, because those are the companies that
are winning.
Yes, and especially like in the long game, it's not kind of just that short game of are we hitting the numbers this quarter, but how are we building a brand that's going to last for the long term?
It is sour and sass, Drew. Now, are you ready?
Oh yes, yep.
All right.
I'm
I'm
going with
going
the
there.
watermelon warhead to start things off.
Oh, yeah. That's brutal. Now, I think the reason I asked you that question was because I think I know the actual reason why it doesn't work. And I think it might be your fault. And when I say your fault, I mean the VC, because I think there's a lot of CEOs that actually believe in my vision for taking market share and spending, but they get their butt kicked by the board. So how does a board work with VC? Because I think they're the silent assassin of marketing, right? You didn't bring them up, but I get enough exposure across over 100 plus SaaS companies. They're all pretty big, right? These aren't the little guys. These are all mid-market enterprise players. And the silent killer of all great marketing, in my opinion, is the board. All right, you got to go in front of the board once a quarter and tell them what you did with the budget they gave you. And the billboard ain't going to show up. It's going to be a big line item, and there's not going to be any ROI from it. So you're going to get your butt kicked by the board, and you're going to get fired. So you don't approve anything that's brand building. You all do direct response. But because your whole budget's going to direct response, you have diminishing marginal returns on every campaign, and performance is constantly getting worse. And the only solution is hire an agency, try another tactic. It's not take a longer term approach on returns and diversify the media mix so you have better brand exposure, which leads to retargeting, which then lowers your direct response CAC, which then gets you increasing marginal returns, which is the model we follow at Directive, right? And this whole methodology we call customer generation, right? Delivering on the promise demand gen forgot about. And so when you think about that, why does what's the VC company's role, the board and the CEO? What's that translation? Because I actually do think the money is the reason why companies aren't bigger. Ironically, despite the companies who are like the money wanting the company to be bigger. Like I think there's this ironic disconnect between the money and the company and the vision.
Yeah. I do think the board is where the accountability comes up on like the spend for sure. But I do think it's kind of funny though. I think I don't know if it's just people are afraid that that's what they think the board is always going to think too. But like, you'd be surprised at like the things that like, man, if you pulled off a really awesome out of home campaign and like, hey, check out how we're portraying the company and things like that. And throw that up on a few slides in like the board meeting, like you'd be surprised at how many board members are like, wow, that is awesome. And what I think it's this balance of like showcasing how the company, showcasing what you're doing with the company to make it kind of look much bigger than you are and kind of more established and the effectiveness of the brand. And I think the onus too is on the marketing team, being a marketer and also kind of seeing on the venture side of things, on educating them on why it's important. And I think that a lot of people just don't go through the effort to try to do that because it is easier to just come back with the waterfall metrics of here's how much we spent and here's how much came out the other end. And, if we hit the number or not for the quarter. And I think they just kind of take the easy route rather than kind of fighting for how do I educate the board members that, yeah, for the most part, none of them are marketers or, they can be more finance backgrounds or legal backgrounds, or they're just, venture investors. I think too, it can be oftentimes hard to find, which is why I think High Alpha has been really lucky. It can be really hard to find investors and board members that have what I would call like an operator's background. And they are investors at heart. And from, that's kind of their main role. And I think where High Alpha plays a unique role in the ecosystem is that everybody on the team is an operator by trade, but then also still today in our day jobs, I'm still working with all of our companies on the studio side, helping name the company and brand the company, build their first website, write their first marketing website, copy and headlines. And, I'm still in it day to day, and the same with kind of our 4 partners. And so all 4 of them were CEOs at one point. They've all founded multiple companies. And so I think my advice would be to find yourself a board member, an advisor who is an operator at heart. They they aren't just in it for the financial return and aren't just kind of a career investor, but are, truly an operator, and they're going to have a different viewpoint on it. And I think you'll be able to convince them of that without kind of as many of the hard numbers.
I love that, Drew.
I say all of that knowing that it's difficult. So
yeah, because I mean, or else we'd see it more often, right? And it's ironic that the ones that are doing the best are the ones doing it, yet other people can't. And so it's like this weird thing I found. Now, let's talk about your number one strategy, right? So you get a new startup, they're part of the high alpha portfolio, and you have $500,000. Break down for me how you spend $500K on a new startup in your mind.
Yeah. That's a great question. Specifically, are you thinking I have $500K to spend on marketing, sales, go-to-market, or $500K in the business as a whole?
Nah, just marketing. So you got $500K for marketing, and you have to spend it over first half of the year. You got 6 months, $500K, and that's your kind of foundational period before they're expecting you to move into a quarterly model with, OKRs and returns.
Yeah. I think back to like the brand side of things, in the early days, you have a very small window to make kind of good, big first impressions. And so I put a lot of money. I'm a big fan of like just forcing functions. So with all of our new companies, I like to do like a bigger launch event or campaign around like the company launch itself. And so like in my put quite a bit of it, $50K toward this like launch campaign of the company. I think yes, launching a brand new startup that pretty much has no customers and no product yet is not newsworthy. But I think if you make a big deal out of it, then other people will think it's a big deal. So that's where like I always kind of encourage people. This is something that you can kind of say is newsworthy. So put a lot of money toward kind of a big launch campaign. Get in front of your customers and the people you want to be your customers, like in person. Nowadays events are coming back. We're doing a little more field dinners and events and marketing events. But I think, especially in enterprise SaaS, the events being in person with people is incredibly important. And I would say a lot of our, back in the pre-COVID days, 40% to 50% sometimes of like a marketing budget would go toward events and conferences and field marketing. I would kind of probably put the same amount there and kind of probably split the rest. It depends on the business. And are we a self-service sign-up business or like enterprise software in terms of where I put the money on the advertising spend side of things? But I like to put a lot into brand SEO and hiring an agency early on and starting to kind of put a lot of work into content. How do we build a content machine or content strategy that is going to be differentiated? Build an audience first.
Content. Let's talk about content there, Drew, just for a millisecond. I want to hear maybe you got a different perspective, because I know you did great stuff at Lessonly, but I think there's some companies like Lessonly that are made for it. You got an LMS, bro. It's like content's made for it, right? And there's others that are hard, right? And so what I mean by that is, okay, so I started Directive. I ranked as number one for SEO agency. I'm all in on content. I obviously do 2 of these live shows a week. I think we have some pretty differentiated, pretty awesome content here. Simultaneously, this is not what pays the bills. Like, this content does not drive revenue, and it's not easy for me to fund, right? So I am a capital allocator at heart. And what I mean by that is, like, I look at something and I say, could I put another 100K into it? Could I put $1 million into it? Could I put 500K into it? Like, does it have that kind of reach? And one of my issues with content is if I put 500K into content, I'm very codependent on discovery, and content's very hard to monetize when you have a high AOV. And what I mean by that is when you serve a specific persona, your content can resonate, but then you need to have pricing that creates easy access. So like a perfect example in SaaS, Profitwell, very niche market where they can have very focused content. But the part no one says around why Profitwell strategy works is because they have a free product. So there's a connection between their content strategy and activation that you can get in a Lessonly, that you can get in a Profitwell, that you can't get with 130K average order value and an enterprise sales process, let's say like a Workday, right? So how does Workday monetize content. So in like your mind, do you think content works for everyone in the same sense? Or do you think we have to create more like defined use cases for content for SaaS? And this is coming from a guy who sells SEO and content for SaaS, but just being actually real about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think the strategy is definitely different, but I think at the end of the day, the content in some way too is also it's a brand play, and so that's where I think is how are you thinking about the
I guess I
goal
was saying
of
through the lens of acquisition, and
content?
you're saying content more generically, right?
Yeah, and and I think it's about building a brand. It's about being known for something, and like when I think about the enterprise side of things, like it's much more about that side of things and what worked really well. I mean, we did this, we ran this playbook phenomenally well at Exact Target, and it was about hard content that is like the two things I always pointed back to what made our content really valuable and what made it successful was like, are we creating something that is unique to us as a business? So like, i.e., this is not the like how to build a social media marketing strategy ebook that you can get at every single one of our other competitors and their mom, but it's something like benchmarks based on the 7 billion emails that we send every month, and it's like something that really only our business is able to kind of give. And then what's something that's inherently valuable? So unique to your business and then inherently valuable. So when you think about a lot of the research reports we did at Exact Target was like the one thing that kind of really shone in this area, but it was, how do you create something that actually helps them at their job? Because at the end of the day, I tell people this too often. It's like, I can't remember who originally said it. Like, you're selling promotions. You know what I mean? Like, why is somebody going to buy your software? It's because they want a promotion. They don't, it's how are you making them look good? And so kind of you think about what is in our content, what can we create, what kind of value can we provide to people at the end of the day that helps them get closer to that? And so to keep on the example, at Exact Target, we would do these benchmarking reports and these state of marketing reports that I think they're now on like the 8th year still running. And, one of the biggest things was we'd have, competitors using this even of like specifically spend data. Everybody would print this thing off and bring it to their boss and be like, hey, look, this is how much, people are spending 50% of their budget on XYZ. Why am I only getting, yeah. And, who do you think they're going to come to when they go to buy a new email service provider? Like you're right. It's not the direct response kind of stuff, but it's just, how do you be helpful and like useful to your audience? And that's when, again, back to the do things that don't scale, the do things that you can't measure. Like, those are the things that at the end of the day, like, truly make your brand great, versus just barely making it. So that's when I think about
I would say it's like that jobs to be done methodology, right? Like, what jobs does my ideal customer have to get done? And then how can my content help them get those jobs done, right?
Exactly. And I think to your point, when there's a free product in a direct response way to like generate content, especially on the SEO side of how are we getting traffic in of people that care about this very specific product and routing them in the right way to the sign up flow, making sure that they're getting value out of it immediately. I think that is a different motion and also highly valuable. But I just kind of think of those as your demand content, if you will, and your kind of brand content. And even sometimes with our organizations, kind of think of them as two different people, even to be responsible for that, and how they're kind of thinking about it.
I love that. Now we have one last sour candy. Are you ready?
Yes.
Oh man,
I'm going for the toxic waste.
Do it. Oh yeah. The second one's so much worse. So my final question for you is more of a future casting question that I'm actually curious. I think you have a lot more insight than I get access to. Do you think free trials will be more prevalent or less prevalent in 2023?
That's a great question.
Thanks, man. I'm on a roll. This is good. I love the feedback.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of OpenView Venture Partners based out in Boston. They have built an entire brand around product-led growth, and Blake Bartlett over there is incredibly smart in this topic. And I do think that we're seeing it move in that way. A lot of the data and studies that they show is just the efficiency that happens kind of, especially after you hit like a certain turning point, like to go from these businesses that are product-led growth, free trial, kind of self-service models, to go from zero to say to the first million takes, I can't remember the data, but it takes twice as long as an enterprise SaaS business. It's request a demo kind of flow. But to go from that, like once you get into the higher scaling side of things, to go from 10 million to 100 million, it takes like 3 times faster if you're a PLG business. And more efficient. And so that's where like I think because of that, you're gonna see more and more companies go in that route. I think it's going to continue to grow. Will it become the norm? I don't know. So
I'm seeing less of it,
big on
right? I think my note is I'm seeing less trial actually than I used to, and more hesitancy, because I think, frankly, people's products aren't as good as they act, for being really honest.
It's 10 times harder.
Your product has to be that much better, right? Because you have to essentially, you don't have an AE to objection handle and explain and do this whole thing, right? And then you have these other people that are doing this concierge onboarding, right? The superhumans, the mighties, that other approach. I think that is like, so that's like being CS led, right? You have CS led, you have kind of this product led, and then you have this sales led. I think they all have their things, right? Like you said, product led is great when it comes to your CAC because you have such a low initial acquisition cost. Then you focus on activation more than acquisition. And so you get economies of scale down funnel, right? Conversely, on the demo side, it's like you have to focus on that initial cost per demo, which is a little bit of acquisition and a little bit of intro call to AE balancing. I'm just curious, I guess, if we look towards tomorrow, if we think trials are going to be more often. I feel like, and part of me wants to say yes, but part of me is like a skeptic because I know products will still suck. You know what I mean? Like it's that like many of the products I see today with our clients, they have a great product, but they don't. It's still we still live in this very custom software world where a lot of the CTOs and the engineers come from this custom software background instead of like scaled software. Does that make sense? And I think that's why this product-led growth doesn't apply. A lot of people's product is still built on this like we'll customize it to you type thing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It's still very manual. I think, yeah, going that route, it is the harder route. You know what I mean? Because then you have to actually build an amazing product and that sells itself, which is much harder than, in my opinion, selling a product. You know what I mean? And I think at the end of the day, you're never going to be able to completely rule out people, because if you're completely self-service too, like a customer is never going to maximize the amount of money that they want to spend with you. You know what I mean? On their own. They're never going to come into a relationship with you and be like, how can I spend the most amount of money with this company? The first thing they look at is what's the cheapest plan that gets me to what I can do. And they don't think about, oh, but if I could use it for this other thing, the consultative sell. So I think, that's where Slack and even Calendly, all these businesses at some point, they still introduce some version of a sales rep, and whether that's, to your point, like a customer support person, but it takes a human consultative discussion to kind of maximize the account value of like a prospect or an existing customer. And so I think that even if companies start in that route, especially as they scale, they will need to add people to the equation. It can't be all product led all the time.
More like a hybrid.
At least to build an efficient
FBC, right? Business. It's like 4 plans, 1, 2, 3, contact for enterprise, right? And that's that like, but I think it's that after that trial, because like Gong is a perfect example, right? Someone comes in for Gong, but the real value of Gong is if you get all the CS reps on Gong. It's not if you get all the SDRs, right? And so it's like, but they aren't very good at that. Like we upsold ourselves. Gong didn't upsell us because the product was so good. But how many people's product's as good as Gong, for being honest, right? And so I think that's that like caveat of this hybrid thing I think we're both talking about. But Drew, it's been amazing. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
You liked it more than anyone.
Oh, I love sour candy, so this was good. It was fun.
This was awesome, man. Well, thanks for being here. This was a great conversation, and that's Sour and SaaS, everybody. Thanks.